Welcome to the History of Love, Part 1, as narrated by Sammy Downing. So, a few housekeeping little details. Number one, I'm only going to be talking about Western civilization, mostly because I don't feel qualified to discuss cultures that are different than my own. I think there's a lot of other people that you could read, and I'll include some links. The second thing is I'm only going to address things that I feel capable of explaining. So I'm not going to touch on the Babylonians or the Mesopotamians. Wow, that's a difficult word to say, because I honestly don't think I am smart enough to deal with their history. I think that it's a little too ancient, and I would need a few more degrees. So, with all of that being said, the main thing to note about the history of romantic love is when I was interviewing people, a lot of people seem to think that romantic love was invented by the Romantics. And I think the confusion comes with the name. So, romantic love, that phrase, that term, definitely started with the Romantics, but the feeling of adoration and tenderness and desire and longing and just that tender feeling of love has existed for thousands and thousands of years, and it was definitely not invented by the Romantics. It just had a lot of different names, and our current term for it is romantic love. So this is the history of love, but I'm not going to be talking about family love, as much as that's very beautiful. This is about that kind of butterfly love that can sometimes last a lifetime. So, where do we begin? Obviously, we have to begin with Sappho, or Sappho. She was a lyric poet writing in 600 BC, and she was incredible, but we only have one surviving poem of hers, which is kind of a tragedy. And she wrote over 10,000 lines of poetry in her lifetime, but we only have fragments. She was just an amazing poet living on the island of Lesbos. So what people like to say about her is that she's the origin of the term lesbian, because Sappho wrote about women loving other women, and she certainly loved women. And, it's unclear if she was married, she might have had a kid, she was essentially a mystery. We don't know much about Sappho, but we do know that she did love women, and she had some profound relationships with them. She's also the only Greek poet. I read a few. I read Homer's lyric poetry. This other guy, I can't pronounce his name, Hesiod. I don't know. I totally butchered that. Anyway, not a lot of love, a lot of raping, a lot of lust, but not a lot of love. Anyway, but Sappho begins it all. So I'm going to read you some fragments. So this is If Not Winter, Fragments of Sappho by Anne Carson. Okay, so this is probably my favorite. She says, "Some men say an army of horse, and some men say an army on foot, and some men say an army of ships is the most beautiful thing on the black earth. But I say it is what you love." And then she goes on to talk about how she's reminded that her love is gone. Her love, who is a woman. And I can't pronounce her name, so I'm not going to try. And then this one is also very beautiful. "He seems to me equal to gods, that man, whoever he is, who opposite you sits and listens close to your sweet speaking. And lovely laughing, oh, it puts the heart in my chest on wings. For when I look at you, even a moment, no speaking is left in me. No, tongue breaks and thin fire is racing under skin, and in eyes no sight, and drumming fills ears. And cold sweat holds me, and shaking grips me all, greener than grass. I am, and dead, or almost, I seem to me." So I just think that that's a profound description of Eros, desire and longing, and just really beautiful. And so if you want to know more, you should head to a podcast called Sweet Bitter. My friend Elise Knorr is the resident poet on that podcast, and she has a lot more interesting and educated things to say about Sappho. Cool. So now we move on to the men of Greece. Dun, 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 dun. So it's Plato. So he writes about love in a few places, but this is probably the best, most palatable place to read it. And he is writing about Socrates and kind of an argument that they're all having together. So this could arguably also be what Socrates thinks about love. So kind of a 2-for-1. And essentially, one thing that's important to note about the ancient Greeks is that there was a culture of older men having sexual relations with younger men. And it was kind of built into the structure of the society. And it was part of the education of these younger men. And often it helped them, kind of learn the ways of the world. And it was the lover and the beloved. And it's just very, very key to their whole culture. However, often, it wasn't often, it was very rare that those relationships existed outside of the young man's kind of childhood or coming of age. It was not socially acceptable for an older man to pursue a lifetime of love, you might say, with men. It was kind of more of this like mentor-mentee situation. The reason why this is really important is because that's kind of the basis of Socrates and Plato's argument about love. And it comes from this mentor-mentee situation where young men really did rely on this kind of sexual relationship with an older man in order to gain access to knowledge. Because, dun, 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 essentially what love is to Socrates and Plato is the search for knowledge. And it's like a spiritual awakening and a desire to learn and know more. So there's a lot of complicated things going on. It's really worth reading if you feel like you want to. But essentially, it's kind of a dinner party, and they're all talking about love. And we come to Socrates, and Socrates, through some complicated logic, basically defines love as something that you don't have. We don't love what we have. We love what we desire, and if we do have it, we desire to keep it forever. So it's kind of this perpetual longing. So that's the first thing he says about love. The second thing is he acknowledges that what you love is beautiful. Love itself is not beautiful because you can't be what you have or what you don't have. Anyway, it's complicated. Love itself is not beautiful, but what you love is beautiful. And then he kind of takes it a step further, and he basically says that love and the act of loving is seeking this higher relationship of understanding, because you love knowledge and you love what you don't have and what you don't know. And so it's really, really beautiful and kind of complicated. He kind of talks about, and there's a speech at the end by a lover of Socrates who basically says that he loves Socrates, who is wisdom itself. So anyway, the point of all of this is basically to say that Socrates and Plato believe that loving makes you a better person, and that seeking love and seeking knowledge is the highest goal. So basically they're saying love is the most important thing. Love is a many splendored thing. We should all love, and it makes us better, and without it, we'd be sad. So that's essentially what they've got to say. Cool. We're moving along. So now we come to Aristotle. So Aristotle was probably my favorite discussion of love for a lot of reasons, but one, I just think he's really smart. I have a lot of admiration for Aristotle, but I really loved what he had to say about love. So first of all, let's just talk about translation. He uses the term eros and the term philia kind of interchangeably. Eros is this desire for, the erotic love. It's kind of a sexy thing, and it can die out. It's not necessarily like a long-standing love. And then philia, which he kind of talks about as this true love, he kind of defines it as true love, is more of a friendship situation. But as we talked about, it is more common for men to love other men. So even though he's using terms like friendship and love in a friendly way, you can also read it as the beloved and the lover. And it's kind of a beautiful commentary on the fact that when you reach this true love, there is friendship there, and there is it's a love that's beyond the erotic, even though it does include the erotic. And he definitely talks about pleasure in this. But to sum up Aristotle really quick, there are 3 types of love. There's love for utility, which basically means I love you because I get something out of it, which is, we've all probably been there. But then there's love for pleasure, which is also kind of like I get something out of it, but it's just like this feels good, generally an erotic love. And yeah, feels good. It's pleasurable. So utility and pleasure. And then there's true love, in his opinion. And true love, or true friendship, is something that transcends utility and pleasure. And it basically means that if you're only friends with someone for what you get out of it, it's not really love, which I think is really beautiful. It's this idea that there is something not transactional and, dare I say, unconditional about love in Aristotle's mind. So then he kind of goes on to talk about friendship and define it. And the key takeaways are, he says that you can't, here, let me read it. It's better in his words. He says, for there is nothing so characteristic of friends as living together, since while it is people who are in need of for it is people who are in need that desire benefits, even those who are blessed desire to spend their days together, for solitude suits such people least of all. I kind of butchered that, but basically he's saying that it's through living together and through active friendship that we truly love. And that's a big defining feature for Aristotle, is that love is not passive, it's active, and it happens every day. And he also defines it as work. And then the final argument, he kind of does some tricky logic, but essentially, when you really love someone, or if there's true love, it's because you love them so much that you want the best for them unconditionally. You want the good for them, no matter what. No matter what, you seek the good for your friend or your lover. And the problem with that is that Aristotle also says that a virtuous man seeks the good for himself, not the most wealthy, goods, not the fattest cows or whatever they valued in ancient Greece. But you want to be the most virtuous person you can be, and you want the best good. And so you also want that for your lover. So what happens if those are in conflict? And he kind of doesn't solve that, I will be honest. He does some tricky logic, but essentially what he says is that when you love someone truly, it's work, and he defines it in a good way. It's an active work. It's working, and a virtuous man wants to work on what makes him better. And so if you love someone and you're seeking the most virtuous things for them, then you're also committing acts of work that suit your soul and make you the most virtuous. So Aristotle, kind of like Socrates and Plato, is basically saying love is the most important thing, and it's really, you got to work at it. You got to work at it. And pleasure and utility have no place in love. I mean, you should have pleasure. He definitely has like a whole chapter on pleasure in here. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Moving along. So we come to the medieval times. So this is where people start to get really confused about romantic love and the history of romantic love. And they think that it was the troubadours who discovered romantic love. Or not discovered, but defined it. And that's probably because of all literary traditions, we're probably most deeply influenced to this day by the troubadours. Think King Lancelot and Guinevere, not King Lancelot, Knight. Whoa, I totally butchered that one. Lancelot the Knight and Guinevere and King Arthur. And then Tristan and Isolde, those classics. And basically the idea is that there's this knight who pines after the lady who's married, and his love is pure, and that his love will no longer be pure if he gets what he wants from the lady, and blah, blah, blah. So people think that that is courtly love or fine amour, is what love was like in the medieval times, which is just not true. It is how people talked about love for sure, and it was how people wrote about love, but it was not how people experienced love. And we know that, and I mean like experience the emotion and the feeling of love. And we know that because there are a lot of surviving letters and things about love between regular people. Well, not regular people, the aristocracy, because they could write. But I will read one such letter. So this is kind of attributed to the beginning of Valentine's Day. Essentially, this lady and this dude really want to marry each other. It's true love, classic. But the lady's dad isn't going to give the dude's dad enough money, whatever. Anyway, they're writing letters in secret. This is a real letter. She goes, Right Reverend and Worshipful, and my right well beloved Valentine, I recommend me unto you full-heartedly, desiring to hear of your welfare, which I beseech Almighty God long to preserve unto his pleasure and your heart's desire. And if it please you to hear of my welfare, I am not in good health either of body or heart, nor shall I be till I hear from you. And my lady, my mother, has pressed the matter on my father full diligently, but she can no more get than that you know of. for that which God knows, I am most sorry. But if you love me, as I trust verily that you do, you will not leave me therefore. But if you had not half the fortune that you have, and if I had to do the greatest labor that any woman alive might, I would not forsake you. Wow, that's a love letter. Kind of hard to read. Anyway, so there is evidence of people loving each other and having marriages, some marriages that were based on feelings of love. Certainly not very common. But the question is, where did this courtly love come from? This, man desiring after the lady of the court. And basically it came from Ovid or Ovid. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. But essentially, Ovid wrote this thing called The Art of Love. And it was pretty much a joke. Most people think it was a joke. It was cynical and tongue-in-cheek. And it was witty. He was being smart. He was making fun of some things. And he did have some interesting things to say, but it wasn't meant to be taken literally as like a how-to guide to love. But some of the things he says are like, you should love another man's wife because it's easier. And which is kind of funny because it is easier to love another man's wife because, like Socrates and Aristotle said, it doesn't take as much work to love another man's wife. You just can love them from afar and you don't have to see the nitty gritty. And then he also says that jealousy fuels desire, which is also true. I mean, a lot of people today think that jealousy is part of the erotic life. I'll talk about Esther Perel later on, and she talks about how jealousy is kind of a key part of erotic desire. But, that's in healthy ways, not, coveting and trying to make your other person jealous, as Ovid suggests. So basically, people in the medieval times were reading Ovid for the first time, and he was like very popular. People were into it. And so some rich ladies, and I'm really butchering, you can read a lot more of this, but I'm just trying to go fast, commissioned a chaplain to write their own medieval guide of love. It's called The Art of Courtly Love by Andreas Capellanus. Really needed to learn how to pronounce these before I did it. Anyway, so he basically writes this guide to love, and he defines what love is, between what persons love may exist, where love gets its name, what persons are fit for love. He defines how a man of middle class speaks with a woman of the same class. A man of the middle class speaks with a woman of the nobility. It's honestly pretty hilarious if you have the time and inclination. It's pretty funny. He has a chapter called The Love of Prostitutes, in which he's just pretty mean to sex workers. And how a love once consummated may be increased. Anyway, it's pretty funny. But this was kind of on the rage and contributed to some of the poetry of the time. But essentially, courtly love was, like a lot of things, designed to keep society in check. It was basically this way to kind of control people. So Lancelot obviously serves King Arthur, and if Lancelot is loyal to King Arthur, then he loves King Arthur's lady, and loves her, and is subjected to her every whim. And it's basically a class structure, and it's a way to talk about class and a way to talk about fealty and all that jazz. So courtly love, or fin amour, is just another way to keep you down, but it's not actually romantic love. So anyway, I think that's pretty funny. So we covered Sappho, we covered Socrates, we covered Aristotle, and a little bit of Ovid, and the art of courtly love. So that concludes the history of love, part 1. Thank you for attending my fireside chat.